Chapter 1. 9 Hours of Rope. The rope was cold under my palms before the sky had made up its mind about morning. I walked it hand over hand from the drum out to the shackle, 80 fathoms of new-laid hemp, counting the lay, the way Fenno taught me before he taught me anything else. Not with my eyes, with the pads of 3 fingers reading the twist per foot, hunting the one flat spot, the one loose crown, that would say a strand had been laid under tension instead of true. Under strain was under strain, Fenno used to say. Chain, leather, or hemp, the reading was the same skill wearing 3 coats, and my fingers filed that away without my asking them to. There wasn't one. There never was, not in mine. 80 fathoms had taken 9 hours at the walk, both hands moving from gray dawn to gray dawn across 3 days, because that was what the skill cost, and I had never found a way around the cost, and I had stopped looking for one around year 2. Rank 6 meant I could warrant a rope to hold 640 stone for 9 years, and swear to it before the register with my own name on the line. Rank 6 did not mean the rope laid itself. I had earned every fathom of this one on my knees in sawdust, and by the 9th bell it was going to earn me something back. At the collar, where the strands married into the eye splice, my mark was already struck into the iron tag wired on. T. Rale. Under it, stamped by the same iron the moment I'd finished the swearing, the words I'd waited 4 years to put on anything of mine that mattered.
Warranted. 640 stone/9 years. Mark T. Rale.
I put 2 fingers on the tag. 4 years, and it still didn't sit right that the metal said mine.
"You're early,"
Pell said, when I came into the rope-walk shed to fetch the coil hooks. And he said it fast, the way a boy says a thing he's decided on before you've asked him anything. He was sitting up against the fiber bins with straw stuck to his shoulder, fresh straw, pale and dustless, nothing like the trodden gray stuff that had sat in that corner a week. He must have thought I wouldn't clock it. I had laid rope in this shed for 11 years. I knew every corner of it better than my own hands, and my own hands were what I made my living with.
"So are you,"
I said, and let it sit. He got up too fast, brushing at himself, and when he crossed to the tally slate to fetch the hooks off the nail beside it, his sleeve dragged once, hard, across the wax where the day's counts got scratched. Underneath the tally, before he covered it, a name showed through. Not his. Not mine.
"Came in early from home.
He said, not looking at me.
Wanted to see the rope before the crowd got at it."
"All right,"
I said, because I had a mark to strike in 3 hours, and a boy's trouble was not going to be the thing that cost me it. But the straw went in a pocket of my mind next to the name and the sleeve, filed under things I'd come back to whether Pell liked it or not. Out in the yard, the tally board stood chalked up under the headframe shadow, and the number crew were still totting the morning's count against the manifest. Miners going down for the deep draw, the ore carts, the pump crew, the tools riding the cage deck. 196 souls, 612 stone. Under it, in Andra Vesk's own square hand, because she trusted the number to nobody's fist but hers. Warranty 640. 28 stone of headroom. I'd built the rope to carry more than the shaft would ever ask of it in a season, let alone a morning, and the chalk laid out plain against my own number was the closest I'd come to easy breathing in 3 days.
"You'll be wanting the drumhead,"
Andra said, coming up beside me with a clerk's ledger under one arm and her steward's chain catching the early light.
"I've moved the mark passing there instead of the office steps. The deep draw goes down at the 9th regardless of ceremony, and I'll not hold 300 families standing in a yard for an hour to watch a woman strike an iron. We do it while the cage loads."
that puts the passing and the drop in the same breath.
I said.
"Puts them in the same morning. It's the only kind I've got to spend."
She was already turning for the winder house. I didn't like it, and said nothing, because she was 3 strides gone before I'd found the next thing to put against it. I turned the shape of it over, walking to the headframe ladder anyway. The 2 things I wanted braided together whether I liked the braid or not. My mark on Pell's iron, the 10-year contract signed under my walk's name, so the rope walk would still be mine after I'd stopped standing in it. And 40 feet under all of that, the collar where this cage would stop. The shaft ran on past it in levels below, but 40 feet was as far as this rope's morning needed to answer for. The board still said 612 against 640. The rope had cost 9 hours, and every fathom of skill I owned, and I had never yet been wrong about a rope I laid with my own 2 hands. I told myself that twice on the ladder, which was 1 time more than I should have needed to. The cage filled the way a cage fills every morning. Miners stepping on in 2s and 3s, lunch pails, a dog someone's boy had smuggled past the gate. Near the back, waiting his turn at the gate rail with a hand already resting on the dog's collar, stood a lean man in a patched coat I'd seen boarding 100 mornings running and never once spoken to. The ore tram lads counting heads out loud, because Gully liked a spoken tally as much as a written one.
194, 195.
Gully's voice cracked flat across the yard, the count he'd been barking every shift for 30 years.
196, and shut her up.
The gate swung to behind the last of them, and the whole yard went still in that particular way it does when everyone's watching the same thing about to happen, and nobody's decided yet whether it's good. Pell came up the headframe stair with the mark iron laid across a velvet cushion. My mark iron, held out stiff-armed, the way you carry a thing you've been told twice not to drop. He found me in the crowd, and grinned like the morning owed him nothing at all. Straw and stolen sleeve and stranger's name folded away somewhere behind that grin, where I couldn't get at them yet.
Ready?
He called up, stepping onto the platform beside the drum, cushion held out ahead of him like an offering. I opened my mouth to answer him. The 9th bell started to ring. Chapter 2, 612. I never got the word out. The bell ate it, that long iron throat of it swallowing the yard whole, and Pell's grin folded into something more careful once he saw I wasn't answering. He turned toward the drum instead, cushion tucked against his ribs, waiting for his cue, still easy in his skin, no doubt yet that the day meant him any harm. The winder man threw the lever. Gully, sleeves rolled, spit already gone from the corner of his mouth because he never chewed root before a lift, only after. The drum took up the slack and began to turn, and the yard went silent, everyone watching the one object, agreeing without a word passed between them not to breathe too loud over it. Even the ore carts stood still on their rails. Even the dogs by the smithy quit barking. Somewhere under my boots, 40 feet and then some, the cage started down into the dark with 612 stone of deep water's living weight, riding on 80 fathoms I had walked myself, hand over hand, in the gray before this bell. The sound came without any warning at all, not a snap, a tearing crack, wet at the edges, like green wood breaking wrong, and underneath it, a long descending shriek of hemp, running loose through iron, that I will hear for the rest of whatever life the system leaves me.
Rope!
Pell shouted, one syllable, and then the drum was spinning free and screaming on its own axle, and the cushion hit the boards and the mark iron rolled off it into the sawdust, forgotten. I do not remember crossing the platform. I remember kneeling. I remember the severed end already in both my hands, my body ahead of any thought that sent it there, the fibers splayed and frayed white at the break, worn past anything 3 days could account for. Not the rope I had laid myself, checked twice down every fathom. I pressed my hands flat against it anyway, hunting for the thing my hands always find in good rope. Nothing answered, no tension, no give, no hum of the lay talking back to me. Dead fiber, telling a dead woman's daughter nothing at all, because there was no weight left on it to read. Only the end of a rope and the absence of everything that had been hanging from the other end of it a breath before. The yard came apart around me in pieces. Someone was already running for the shaft mouth. Someone else was screaming a name that wasn't mine and wasn't Pell's. Over and over, the particular scream of a person whose legs have not yet caught up to what the rest of them already knows. I stayed on my knees with the rope end pooled in my lap like something I had given birth to and killed in the same hour. And I could not make my mouth do anything but stay open around a sound that never came out.
Warranty invoked. Maker at fault. Recalls remaining. 5. Grip. 12 to 11.
The panel hung square in the middle of everything, patient and unblinking as a debt collector at the door. I had time to read every word of it twice. Some cold back room of myself kept working, while the rest of me knelt in sawdust and rope fiber. The system had already decided who to blame before the yard had finished coming apart, and it had decided on me. Then the yard wasn't there. I was on my back in my own bed, in my own room, with the gray light coming thin and blue through the shutter, and the 5th bell was ringing somewhere down the valley, same as it rings every morning of my life, 4 hours ahead of the one that had just torn my rope apart and taken however many of 612 down with it. I lay still and let my heart do whatever it needed to do. It took longer than I would like to admit. My breath came in short pulls that didn't fill anything, and my whole body had gone rigid, the muscles forgetting, for a moment, how to let go of nothing. I made myself breathe slower. I made myself count the roof beams, the same 4 I have counted since I was Pell's age, because counting things I know is the only trick I have ever found for getting my mind back into my own skull. Somewhere behind my sternum sat a small, exact weight I had no name for, and did not want one for. Nothing about the yard, or the drum, or the scream had happened this morning at all, and yet it sat there like a bruise already old when I woke, tender under the ribs whether or not I pressed it. I lifted my right hand to rub the sleep from my eyes, and it would not close. The fingers curled halfway and stopped, locked at the second knuckle, like a hinge gone to rust, and no amount of will I threw at them moved them another inch. I sat up in the dark and stared at my own hand as if it belonged to a stranger who had left it in my bed by mistake, and somewhere in the corner of my sight, small and steady and never once blinking, a number sat waiting for me to look at it straight. Chapter 3. Null. The number steadied when I stopped fighting it, the way a coin settles once you quit spinning it on the table. Grip 12 to 11. Recalls remaining. 5. I stayed like that a long moment, my ruined hand curled in my lap like something I'd found washed up. 11. 5. I had come into this world with 2 good hands and a rank of 6, and in the space of 1 drop and 1 waking, I had already spent a piece of myself I didn't know how to get back. I flexed the fingers that still worked. The other 3 didn't answer. I breathed until my chest stopped its stupid hammering and I could stand it. Then I got up, because sitting in the dark solved nothing, and I dressed with 1 hand doing the work of 2, and I walked to the shaft turning the whole of it over, like rope through a gauge, testing every foot for a flaw. A recall names the maker at fault. That was the law of it, plain as the box that had spoken it to me. Fault, not chance, not weight. I ran the numbers again on the walk down, the ones I'd chalked myself not 4 hours from now in a morning that hadn't happened yet. 612 stone against a warranty of 640. 28 stone of margin, more than most deep draw counts ever carried. The load was inside the rating. I had walked that rope fiber by fiber with my own hands, tested every splice, and there had been nothing wrong in it when I signed it over. So whatever killed 196 people 40 feet down had crawled into that rope after my hands left it, in the hours between the walk and the drum, and if that was true, then somewhere in this shaft this morning was a wrongness with time still to be found and cut out. It was a good argument. It held together the whole way down the road. What I didn't understand yet was that an argument is not a thing you can hand a man and make him stop a shaft. Gully let me finish first, because Gully always let people finish, standing at his winder's bench with his sworn tally open in front of him, his eyes gone soft with the kind of patience men save for the mad and the very young.
"You're telling me a dream,"
he said, when I'd run out of breath.
"A dream about a rope that hasn't run yet."
I'm telling you, I laid that rope and it's true, and something's going to be wrong with it, by the 9th bell.
I said.
Test the drum. Delay the draw 1 hour. That's all I'm asking.
He looked at me the way you look at a plank that might be sound or might not, weighing whether it was worth the bend to find out, and then he shrugged, the whole heavy slope of his shoulders, and went back to his tally, as if I'd already left. The shift captain laughed outright when I found him at the cage gate, a short bark of a sound that cut off the moment he saw I meant it, and after that, he didn't bother arguing with me at all. He signaled someone over his shoulder, without ever looking away from my face, and a constable had my arm before I'd finished my second sentence, walking me backward toward the fence with the patient, immovable pressure of a man who has moved drunks before, and finds this no different. I talked the whole way. I told him the count, the margin, the years I'd spent at the walk, the names of ropes I'd laid that were still holding up shafts twice this deep. None of it slowed his feet. By the time the fence latched behind me, the truth I'd dodged in the office 3 hours ago, and wouldn't dodge again, landed clean. Being right and being believed are two different ropes, and I only had my hands on one of them. There was slack cage rope coiled by the shed wall, last month's, waiting to be cut for scrap, and I went to it instead of the fence, because a woman does not stand still when she has just been told her word is worth nothing. I knelt and put both palms flat against the fiber, the way I have 1,000 times, calling up the sense that lives under my skin and has never once lied to me. Nothing answered. No tension, no history, no 11 years of the walk speaking back through my hands. Just rope, dead and slack and telling me nothing at all. Read the lay. Rank 1. Null. Requires live load. I sat back on my heels. The truth arrived distant and useless, like a bell rung in another valley. The gift I'd trusted my whole life needed weight on the line to speak. Real weight. Souls and stone. It never cared what carried that weight. Rope, or chain, or leather. Only that something living leaned its whole strain against it. And I had exactly one rope in this shaft that would ever carry that much, and it wouldn't carry it until the 9th bell, on the cage, with everyone aboard. The dead fiber under my palms dragged up the other memory, the one that had been circling since I woke, looking for a door. 11 years gone, my palm flat against Fenno's oar bridge rope the week before it went. Something wrong in the lay that I couldn't name and didn't trust, because the mark on that rope wasn't mine to question. I'd said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my rope, wasn't my judgment to make. And 4 men had gone into the gorge believing a mark that wasn't a lie, so much as a silence, with my name nowhere on it. I was on my feet again before I'd decided to be, walking toward the headframe with no plan in my head beyond the one true thing I had left. Get my hands on that rope while it was carrying weight, whatever it cost to reach it. I went up the ladder, past a startled ropeman who shouted something I didn't hear over the blood in my ears, and I got both palms flat to the cage line just as the drum took the strain, and the 9th bell began, far below, to ring. For 1 second the rope spoke to me everything it had never had the chance to say. 14th fathom, core gone soft, 14 fathoms of line paid out from the drum, not yet 40 feet down the shaft, and then the fiber let go under my palms with a crack like green wood snapping, and the whole rig came apart in the same instant, deck and ladder and line together, and I was falling with the truth still fresh in my hands and nowhere left to put it. Chapter 4. Clause 11. I hit the crossbrace 6 feet down, and it turned what should have been a 40-foot fall into 6. Something gave in my shoulder on impact, a wet pop I'd be paying for in a fortnight. 2 ropemen hauled me up by the collar of my coat, one of them shouting into my face that I'd near put us both through the boards. His words came apart before they reached me, just noise and spit. Underneath them, sitting behind my eyes like a brand burned twice into the same hide, was the readout the rope had given before it threw me. 14 fathoms out, the core gone to rot. They set me down against the winch housing, and somebody pressed a rag to the cut over my eyebrow, hard enough to sting. Below us, the cage still hung, where the same strand had let go, canted hard against the guides, its bell caught mid-strike and never finishing the note. My ruined hand sat curled uselessly in my lap, and my body had already decided what my mouth didn't want to admit. Shouting the truth at men who'd watched me fail twice already was never going to move a rope. Gully hadn't believed me slack. He wasn't going to believe me bleeding. So within the hour I went back to the drumhead, hoping a second telling might land where the first hadn't. It didn't. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and busied himself oiling a fitting that plainly needed no oil. I went a second time before the next cage loaded, hoping to catch Gully before the queue swallowed him, and found the shift captain already counting heads, his back half turned to me before I'd said a word. Twice was enough. I stopped asking men to believe me, and went looking for something that didn't need their belief at all. The mine office sat at the far end of the yard, low-roofed, smelling of tallow and old paper, and behind the counter, a narrow clerk with ink on both hands kept the shaft's register, meticulously, more thoroughly than the job strictly required. I told him I needed the charter. He didn't ask why. He set the ledger down between us, its spine cracked soft from handling, and let me read. Clause 11 was 3 lines, and I read them 4 times before I trusted I had them whole. No unwarranted rope may be run in a chartered shaft. The winderman's sworn tally binds him, personally, to refuse the lever on any line not so warranted. My good hand went flat on the page, pressing down as if the words might slide off it if I let go. Gully's sworn tally bound him, made him the one man in that yard who couldn't shrug at a condemned rope and wave the cage down anyway. It was the oath that held him, not his own stubbornness. If the rope were condemned. I asked the clerk what it took to condemn a warranted line before it failed, and he gave me a look I'd come to know well over the following days, the look of a man citing rules he'd never once seen tested. A claim entered against a standing warranty is weighed by standing, he said, tapping a column of names and numbers I hadn't known existed until that moment. Mine sat at 3. Andra Vesk's sat at 9.
That's no hearing.
I said.
That's an arithmetic problem, solved before I open my mouth.
He didn't disagree. A claim below a steward's standing, he said, cannot open an inquiry on testimony alone. It needs a physical exhibit in hand, something the register can weigh, that isn't just one ropemaker's word against one steward's oath. I asked what would count. Rot pulled from the rope itself, he said. A fault you could set on this counter and point to. I sat back and did the only arithmetic that mattered. I had a number in my skull, 14 fathoms out, and no way yet to cut it free of 80 fathoms of rope that Gully wouldn't stop running long enough for me to try. Pell would be at the walk by now, wondering where I'd gone. I thought of him sleeping rough in the shed and telling me nothing, and set the thought aside. It wasn't the day's business. The day's business was narrowing to one door, and it wasn't a door I had a key to yet. The office door opened on its dry hinge, and I didn't need to look up to know the step. Andra Vesk crossed to the counter unhurried and settled onto the stool across from me, as if she'd been expected.
Clerk,
She said, pleasant as a woman remarking on the weather.
I hope you've been generous with the register for our rope maker.
She turned to me, her face carrying nothing unkind in it, which was somehow worse than if it had.
You've been at the drumhead twice already this morning, Toriane. I counted.
She folded her hands on the counter, patient as a woman with the whole day to spend on one question.
I'm curious what brings you here for the third visit instead.
Chapter 5. The Steward Who Counted Further. The clerk had already found something urgent to do with the ledgers at the far end of the counter, head down, pen scratching too fast to be honest work. I didn't blame him. I wouldn't have wanted to be within arm's reach of this conversation either.
I'm looking for a precedent.
I said, which was true as far as it went.
A rope condemned before it's failed, whether the registers ever logged one on a claim alone.
And has it?
Andra said, already certain of the answer that sat behind me on the shelf, in the clause I'd spent the morning copying onto a scrap I'd hidden under my sleeve.
No, because a claim alone isn't worth the ink. Toriane, and you've read enough of the register today to know that before you asked me.
She didn't raise her voice. She never did. It was the stillness that raised the hair on my arms. A woman who'd already walked every branch of this conversation, and knew which one I'd take before I took it.
Then I'll get the ink worth something.
I said.
With what hand?
She said, and looked at my right hand, curled loose in my lap where I'd been keeping it out of sight under the counter's lip. I hadn't caught her looking. She hadn't needed to.
I heard you dropped a mug of small beer at the anchor before the bell. Gully mentioned it, laughing. Said your grip's gone.
I didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that didn't hand her more than I'd already lost.
I'm going to tell you something, and I'd rather you heard it plain than frightened. I have been having this morning longer than you'd believe if I gave you the number. Long enough that I stopped counting mornings and started counting what they cost me.
She turned her hand over on the counter, palm up, as if weighing something invisible in it.
I remember every one. That's the steward's curse, not the maker's. You reset. I stay whole, and watch it happen again. And I have burned through nearly everything I own, keeping it from happening the way it wants to happen. I'm close to the bottom of what's left, Toriane. Closer than you, I'd guess, though you won't credit that either.
I believed her. That was the trouble. Something under the pleasantness had gone thin, worn down. Not one bad night's toll, but years of it, folded into a morning she couldn't stop having.
Then help me.
I said.
You're in the chain, same as I am. You know the rope's bad. Pull the lever yourself. Tell Gully to hold.
And condemn the shaft.
She said.
On the word of a rope maker, with 3 standing and a hand that can't hold a cup. Let me lay my arithmetic next to yours, since you keep skipping past it. The pumps at levels 4 and 6 haven't been rebuilt since my grandfather's charter, and they flood past their float twice a season already. The charter measure comes due at the winter assize, and if this shaft doesn't run its full tonnage against a signed 10-year contract, the assize lets it lapse, and 300 families, who have never once heard of a 14th fathom, lose their bread inside a year. That's not a threat, Toriane. That's this morning, whether you and I agree on it or not.
She folded her hands again, one thumb pressing the corner of the hidden papers square.
So here is what I'll give you. Sit down. Let the cage run. Sign your contract this hour. 10 years. Your mark on the drumhead same as it was always going to be. And I will find you every hour this office has to spare afterward, to test whatever you like, under whatever load you like. I will not spend it fighting you today.
10 years. My walk. My name over the shed door long after I was too old to lay a rope myself. Pell's children learning the lay from a board I'd chalked. The papers were already drawn. I could see the corner of them under her elbow where she'd folded her hands. My name already set in the maker's line, in a clerk's careful copperplate, waiting only for my mark to make it true. She'd found the exact shape of the thing I'd wanted since I was 15, and set it on the counter between us like a coin, and all it cost was letting a morning happen that I already knew the ending of.
No.
I said, and the word came out rougher than I meant it.
I read that rope on a live load. I'm not signing anything with it still hanging on the drum.
Andra's jaw set, her mouth flattening. The first time since I'd walked in that she looked like she was choosing her next words rather than already knowing them. She leaned in an inch.
There's one other road,
she said.
And I notice you haven't asked me about it, which tells me you've already found it, and you're pretending you haven't. A maker can strike her own mark through, cancel it, in her own hand, with her own iron. It condemns the rope permanently. No rewarranting, no appeal. It also ends you. Your rank falls to nothing. The guild takes your name off the roll the same day, and no mill in 6 charters will sell you fiber again.
She let it sit a moment.
The one mercy in it is that read the lay isn't a craft rank, so they can't touch it. You'd keep the judgment. You'd lose everything the judgment used to be worth.
Her voice didn't soften, but it slowed, the way a woman's does when she's saying the truest thing she owns.
I don't recommend it. I know what it does to a person who chooses it, but I wanted you to know the door was there before you spent another morning pretending it wasn't.
I'm not choosing it.
I said, Too fast. The two words already sounding like a lie by the time they finished leaving my mouth.
No,
Andra agreed.
not yet.
She stood, smoothing her coat, and the pleasantness came back down over her face like a shudder.
Then I'm afraid you've had your third visit for the day. Rope walk, and I have a mark passing to run.
She said something low to the two men who'd been waiting by the door the whole time, close enough to have caught every word, and careful enough not to have moved through any of it. They didn't argue with her. Neither did I, in the end. Not with a hand that couldn't have held the gate latch shut against them if I'd tried. They walked me past the assay shed, past the weighhouse, out through the fence gate onto the road, with the mine yard falling away behind a stand of birch, and stood there with their arms crossed until I understood I wasn't coming back through today. I was still standing on the wrong side of that fence, listening to my own breath, when I understood the 9th bell had never stopped. The same 9 strokes drawn out since before I'd sat down across from her, the last of them falling now, while I stood locked outside the gate. The drum turned somewhere past the birch, out of sight. The cage's rattle picked up the way it always did when Gully let the pawl off early, impatient for the bell to finish. Then a second sound cut under the bell, a crack that carried farther than rope should carry, and men were shouting on the far side of the trees before the 9th stroke had finished ringing out. I didn't have to see it. I already knew which fathom it would be. The morning went white at the edges, the fence and the birch and my own name being called from somewhere I couldn't reach, all folding down into nothing.
Warranty invoked. Maker at fault. Recalls remaining. 4.
Chapter 6. Fenno's Rope. The bell had barely finished its first stroke when the sound came anyway, carried thin over the birches. Not the bell's clean iron note, but something underneath it. A groan that broke into a snap I felt in my back teeth, the second time in my life that particular sound had found me. The yard beyond the fence dissolved into noise I couldn't sort into people. I was already running for a gate I knew wouldn't open when the world went out from under me like a floor pulled sideways. I hit, and everything stopped.
Warranty invoked. Maker at fault. Recalls remaining. 3. Grip. 9.
I woke in my own bed with the gray coming up soft behind the shutter. My right hand curled the way it had been curling since the last time this happened to me. Fingers locked past the first knuckle, like they'd frozen reaching for something I never got to hold. 4 mornings now I had spent arguing my way toward a rope nobody would let me touch. This one I wasn't going to waste on arguing. I dressed with one hand doing the work of 2, left sleeve first, and walked down through a town that didn't know yet what its own bell was about to ring for. The rope walk door stood open when I got there, which told me before I saw the straw in the corner that Pell had beaten me to it. He was up on his knees against the far wall, folding a blanket too fast in a way that had nothing to do with tidy. I didn't need a gift for reading rope to read that.
You're early.
He said, which was what he always said when he meant I wasn't ready for you yet.
So are you.
I said.
Every morning, it turns out. Get me the guild hemp down from the loft. All of it we've got seasoned.
He didn't ask why I wanted 80 fathoms of rope with the drumhead already dressed for a mark passing and a rope already hanging warranted in the shaft. Maybe he'd learned by now not to. He went up the ladder 2 rungs at a time and started throwing bales down before I'd cleared the walk floor. I set the first strand in the hook and found out inside a minute what 9 hours and 2 good hands had always been hiding from me. That I didn't have 2 good hands anymore. The right one could pin a strand against my hip if I braced my whole forearm into it. But it wouldn't close around the lay, wouldn't feel it, wouldn't do the 1,000 small corrections a hand does without being told to. I worked the wrist instead, and the crook of my elbow, and swore at fiber that wanted turning I couldn't give it, and made in the first quarter hour maybe half what I'd have made whole.
Let me take the twist.
Pell said, watching me lose a foot of clean lay to a hand that wouldn't obey.
You call it, I'll turn it.
I let him. It was slower than one master's 2 hands, but faster than one master's 1, and there wasn't room left in me to care whose hands did the turning, only that the rope came true. We worked like that a while, him at the winch handle and me walking the strand out and calling the lay, and it was somewhere in the second fathom that I started telling him about Fenno, before I'd decided to say any of it.
I had a master before I had my own mark.
I said,
11 years back. He laid an ore bridge rope for the eastern gorge. Cable lay, 400 fathom of it strung between the headwalls, and 2 days before they hung it, I walked the finished coil with him, the way you're walking this one with me now. I ran my palm down it, because that's what you do. You feel for what your eyes miss.
My own palm was doing it right then, out of habit, on rope not 4 hours old.
And I felt something, under the third layer, where the core sits, a softness that didn't belong. My gift never cared that it was a coil at rest, instead of a load under strain. It answered anyway, the way it answers anything, carrying weight, or waiting to.
What'd you do?
He said, and his hands had gone still on the winch.
Nothing.
I said,
I told myself the mark on that coil was his, not mine, and that whatever I felt under my own fingers belonged to the man whose name was struck on the iron, not the woman standing next to him with an opinion. So I said nothing. He hung it, and it held for 6 weeks, and then it didn't, and 4 names got read out, at the Guildhall, that I have known by heart every day since, whether I wanted to or not.
Pell didn't say anything for a long moment, and I let him not say it, because there wasn't a version of I'm sorry that would have fit in the space that story left.
That why you're out here?
He said finally.
Stead of at the gate hollering at Vesk again?
That's why I'm out here, instead of anywhere else.
I said, and went back to calling the lay before he could ask me to make it plainer than that. We got another fathom into it before I broke off to dig through the delivery crate for the second bale of guild hemp, and it was there, wedged under the twine, that I found my own tally book from the week the fiber came in. I hadn't gone looking for it. I'd gone looking for rope. I opened it anyway, because a rope maker who's just told her apprentice about a rope she didn't check doesn't walk past an unchecked page. The entry was in my own hand, dated, countersigned the way every delivery gets countersigned before it's cleared to the walk floor. Guild hemp, guild price, 40 bales, T. Rale. My own mark sat under it clean as anything, the mark I'd struck 100 times on 100 honest deliveries, without once thinking a page like this one could lie to me. Something turned over in my stomach, ugly and slow. If the fiber that came onto this floor was written down as guild hemp at guild price and countermarked by my own hand, then no ledger anywhere would ever say different. A swap made before that page was written wouldn't touch it. Whatever had gone soft under a load 6 months from now, this book would swear on my own signature that it had never been anything but sound.
What?
Pell said, watching my face.
Nothing I can put in front of a register.
I said, and closed the book, and went back to the lay before the shake in my hands could reach my voice. We laid rope through it, fathom by slow fathom, the tally book still open-faced on the crate where I'd set it down, because closing it wouldn't have unwritten what was on the page. The light through the door went from gray to something with color in it, before I made myself stop and count what we'd laid against the mark on the walk floor that told me how far 80 fathoms actually ran.
11 fathom.
I said out loud, doing the sum standing still because sitting down to do it felt like giving up ground I hadn't lost yet.
11 fathom in an hour and a half, 4-handed, as we're managing it. At this rate, it's 11 hours to finish a rope. I've got 4 to lay, and I've already burned the best part of 2.
Pell looked at me across the walk with the winch handle still in his hands, waiting for the rest of the arithmetic, and I didn't have anything better to give him than the number itself. Chapter 7, 22 fathoms.
11 hours.
Pell said, like saying it back to me might shrink it.
For a rope you've got 4, and you've already burned the best part of 2.
I know what I said.
I flexed my left hand around the strand I was still holding and made myself let go of it long enough to reach for the next length of hemp.
We don't stop because the sum's ugly. We stop when there's no more walk left to lay it on.
He didn't argue. That was the thing about Pell I kept forgetting to be grateful for, until it was in front of me again. The arithmetic landed on him the same as it landed on me, and he picked the winch handle back up anyway. We went at it in pieces small enough to survive one at a time. He fed the strand, I walked it out, and laid the lay with my left hand doing the work of two. My right curled uselessly against my apron, like something borrowed that didn't fit. 20 fathoms came and went under the reel. Then 21, 22. My shoulders stopped being shoulders and turned into a single ache that ran collarbone to hip, and I let it, because stopping to notice it would have cost me lay I didn't have to spend. A panel opened at the edge of my sight, small and patient, the way they always were, when they had nothing urgent to say.
Lay, rank 6, progress to rank 7, 61%.
I laughed, one short breath of it, and Pell glanced up from the winch like the sound worried him.
System thinks I might rank up.
I said.
Thinks if I lay hard enough, it'll hand me a 7th recall for my trouble.
Would that help?
It'd help the woman who has more than 4 hours in her morning.
I fed another length through my ruined hand, slower than my left, slower than it had any business going, and kept feeding it anyway.
This day ends whether I'm ready for it or not. Rank doesn't come due partway through. It comes due when the walk's finished. And I've never finished this walk in under 9. So it can dangle rank 7 in front of me, as long as it likes. I haven't got the hours to reach for it.
He didn't say anything to that. He just turned the handle a little harder, like it was something he could argue with instead. We measured out to 22 fathoms by the mark on the floor, not quite a third of 80. 4 hours of work standing in for what should have taken 9. And even four-handed with a bad set of hands, it wasn't going to be enough, and both of us knew it. I didn't say the rest of the sum out loud. I didn't need to. It had crossed Pell's face at fathom 18, and stayed there, plain as the number itself. The 9th bell was close. A pressure built at the back of my skull, nothing to do with sound yet.
I have to go up.
Pell said, setting the winch handle down like it cost him something.
Andra wants apprentices at the drum for the passing. If I'm not there...
Go,
I said, because there wasn't a version of keeping him where the cost of him staying was smaller than the cost of him being caught not there.
I'll lay what I can alone.
He went. His boots crossed the shed boards, then the yard, then nothing. And I kept working, because working was the only thing I had that resembled doing something. My right hand shook too hard now to close around the strand at all. I was laying with one hand and holding the rest steady with my forearm. An ugly, graceless method Fenno would have made me redo twice over in the years he taught me. And I didn't care, because 22 fathoms of true lay beat 40 of nothing. The bell started. 9 strokes, the same ones I'd counted from a head frame, from a road outside a fence, from my own bed with a hand that wouldn't close. I didn't move toward the yard. There wasn't a version of the next 4 minutes where I crossed that distance in time to matter, and some cold, arithmetic part of me, the part that had learned to count fathoms and stone and hours until it forgot how to do anything else, knew that before my legs did. The sound came to me anyway, down the whole length of the shed, muffled by wood and distance into something almost gentle, a crack, and under it, rising, a noise made of more throats than one. Pell's voice was in it somewhere. I couldn't have told you which part was his and which was everyone else's, and not knowing was its own wound, small and sharp. I stood at the walk with the last uncoiled length of rope still in my one working hand, and did not run. There was nowhere to run to that would have arrived before it was already finished. My knees went first, then the sawdust floor came up sideways to meet me, then a gray that had no edges left to narrow toward, the same gray it was always waiting to give me back.
Warranty invoked. Maker at fault. Recalls remaining. 3. Grip, 9 to 8.
I came to on the sawdust floor of the rope walk with the 5th bell not yet rung. My right hand curled tighter than it had been an hour ago by my own count, both hands trembling too hard to close around a strand of anything. I didn't get up. I sat where I'd landed, and stared at the empty air where the panel had already come and gone. willing it back, needing the number in front of my own eyes, before I trusted a single thing about the morning starting over around me. Chapter 8. 30 Loads. I called the panel myself this time, before I'd even gotten my knees under me. A maker could summon her own status if she thought the shape of the question hard enough at the gray morning air. I'd wondered about that once, kneeling at a scrap coil with nothing better to do than ask my own gift questions it hadn't been asked before. And now, standing in the sawdust with my ruined hand cradled against my ribs like something I'd caught falling, it answered.
Toriane Rale. Craft. Lay 6. Grip. 8. Recalls remaining. 2.
2 left. 8 of 12 gone, from a hand that used to close a fist in a quarter second, and now took 4 heartbeats and hurt doing it. I stood there with the number sitting cold in the corner of my eye. It didn't warm anything, and it didn't fix anything. It just sat there and refused to move, and eventually that was enough to get my feet under me. I was not going to lay 80 fathoms of rope in 4 hours. I had proved that twice. Once at 22 fathoms with Pell's hands doing the work of a second person, and mine doing half of one, and once by never reaching the walk at all. So I stopped trying to build the rope that would save the cage, and started trying to become the thing that could read the one already hanging there. 30 loaded reeds to rank 3. I had one, snatched off the cage line itself in the second before I fell off the headframe, and it had told me everything and saved no one. A number in my mouth was not a hand on the brake. The pump brake at the level 4 headhouse was next, because it never stopped running, and nobody paid it enough mind to ask why a rope maker had her hands flat on the dragline. The rope there was old, oiled black, humming under a strain that came up through my palms like a held note. Sound, even lay, no history in it worth telling. Not what I needed, but a reed was a reed, and the system didn't care whether the rope was interesting.
You're bleeding on my brake line,
Gully said, not looking up from the ore tram gate he was chaining for the morning run.
Hands don't hold like they used to.
I said, and left it at that.
Not from where I'm standing.
He clicked the last link shut and gave the tramcar a shove that sent it rattling down the rail on its own rope, taut, loaded with spoil.
You want a live line. There's 40 feet of it right there. Don't fall in front of it. I've got enough to explain to the steward, without a dead rope maker under the wheels. Folk are already asking why I let you anywhere near rope, after this morning.
I didn't ask him what he meant by enough already. I put my hands on the tram rope instead, and let the car's weight run through my palms while it went. River hemp, gild lay, sound clear through the splice, nothing else in it worth naming. He sent a second car after it, then a third, hauling gate after gate without asking again why I was doing it. He had a shift to run, and no patience left over for arguing with a woman who wouldn't stop touching rope. He wasn't choosing to believe me. He was just choosing the faster fight to skip. By the time I reached the smithy, the count in my chest sat somewhere past a dozen. My palms had gone raw enough that I stopped looking at them and started counting instead, the way I'd once counted the roof beams just to have something to do with my eyes. The smith's chain hoist wasn't rope at all. But my gift didn't care. It had already told me as much, kneeling at that dead coil, that anything under strain would answer if I asked it right. So when I laid my palm on the tackle fall while he swung a broken cage wheel up off the anvil, the readout came anyway, half in words I hadn't expected. Iron, not rope, but sound, and nothing in it that answered to my mark. Then the bell tower stay rope, slack until the sexton's boy leaned his whole weight on it to test the swing before the hour, and for 3 seconds it was taut enough to speak. 22. I was crossing back toward the yard, my hand shaking too hard to close around anything, and both palms raw from rope after rope, when I found the notice nailed to the office door, and Andra Vesk standing in front of it, like she'd been waiting for me to arrive and read it herself.
The mark's suspended,
She said, before I could ask.
As of this hour, T-Rail may certify no new work under charter until the steward's office lifts the order.
She said it the way she said everything, without heat, a fact laid down flat.
The iron's in the strong box. I locked it myself.
The cage rope's already laid.
I said. My voice came out steadier than my hands.
You can't touch a mark that's already struck.
I'm not touching it.
Her fingers found the edge of the notice and pressed it flat against the door, a small, unnecessary smoothing, as if the paper needed her hand on it to be true.
Your warranty on the deep draw stands exactly as it is. 640 stone. 9 years. Your mark at the head. I've only made certain you can't lay anything new to replace it before the bell.
She glanced at my hands, at the raw heat in my palms from a morning's worth of loaded reeds, and didn't ask what I'd been doing with them.
You were never going to finish a rope today, Rale. I'm only saving you the trouble of trying.
She left me standing at the door with the notice at my back, and the strongbox somewhere behind her office wall. My mark iron shut up inside it, where I couldn't reach it, even if I found a way to strike the thing I hadn't let myself say the word for. It didn't matter, not yet. Read the lay had never asked for a mark or a rank or a strongbox key. It asked for palms and live weight, and I had both, and the yard was full of rope. I found what I still needed at the ore scale chains behind the weighhouse, 3 cars worth of chain drawn taut against the counterweight, while the weighman called out figures I wasn't listening to. 25. Then the mule team traces at the stable gate, drawn tight for a heavy pull, the animals leaning into their collars while I stood at the harness and let the strain speak through my palm, the way it had spoken through everything else that morning. 27. The last of what I needed came at the winch house bell itself, my hand flat on the pull cord as the sexton threw his weight into the 9th stroke, and the whole shaft of it went taut and singing under my palm.
Read the lay. Rank 3.
The 9th bell was already ringing across the yard when the number turned over, and 40 feet below the headframe, the cage was already loaded. Chapter 9. What the Core Says. The rank 3 gift was still sitting behind my eyes, useless as a coin, with no counter to spend it on, when the 9th bell's 2nd stroke rolled out flat across the yard. I knew it before my foot found no floor. I had already lost the only argument that mattered. There was no time to walk into the office and lay a rank down like proof of anything. There was only the drum, and the rope, and 4 hours of dawn already spent to nothing. I ran for the headframe.
Rale, you're barred the pit. Get back of the line.
Gully shouted, one hand already on the brake lever, his sworn tally board clutched to his chest, with the other like it might hold something back on its own.
14th fathom.
I said, not slowing.
I need it under load. Gully. 1 second. That's all.
Get off my drumhead.
He didn't come after me, and that told me more than the words did. Behind him, the cage gate clanged shut on its own weight, and the counting bell rang the tally the way it always did. 196 souls, 612 stone, comfortably inside a warranty, rotting from the inside at fathom 14, and had been since before I ever coiled the last hank onto the drum. The latter rungs bit cold through my palm. The left one, the good one, the right hooked stiff around the rail like a claw that had forgotten how to be a hand. I climbed anyway. Nobody had thought yet to post a man at the bottom of it, and I didn't let myself wonder how long that would last.
Get her down!
Andra called from somewhere below, her voice pitched to Carrie without sounding like it needed to.
Constable! Now!
I didn't look down. Whatever the constable did about it was his problem, not mine. 4 rungs left, the bell already through its 3rd stroke, and the drum starting to turn, the take-up groaning, as slack drew taut across the sheave. I got both palms flat on the line as the cage took its first full swing of weight, and the rope woke under my hands, the way it always did at the start of a draw. A long, low hum, 80 fathoms remembering all at once that it had a job to do.
Read the lay. Fathom 14. Core. River redded. 3 seasons wet. Outer strands sound as the morning laid.
Everything I had wanted since the shed floor arrived at once, plain as a bell. The rope told me in the only language it had where I'd been right, and how long I'd been ignored. Gilled hemp on the outside, where any tally keeper's eye could check it. River hemp buried in the core, where nobody's eye ever went. 3 seasons wet. Sound to look at. Rotten to hold.
14th fathom.
I shouted down, my voice cracking louder across the yard than I meant it to. Loud enough that heads turned all along the line.
Core's gone soft. Stop the drum, Gully. Stop it now.
His head came up. The tally board lifted an inch off his chest. The old law, a winder man's sworn tally binds him to refuse the lever, a debt he'd forgotten he owed, until the board reminded him. Then the drum kept turning anyway. A number in my mouth was not a hand on the brake, and the cage was already 30 feet down with its own weight, doing the deciding now, momentum that didn't care what I'd just learned, or how true it was.
There is no reading that stops a chartered draw mid-run,
Andra said, close enough now to be heard without the shout. Her voice flattened down to the register she used for numbers that couldn't be argued with.
Not from standing 3, not from the steward who bought the rope. You know that. Get down before you're the second thing that falls today.
I didn't get down. Letting go felt like the last lie I'd ever tell, so I kept both palms on the rope, and under them the hum climbed toward something higher, tighter, wronger. Fiber deciding it had held all it was ever going to hold. It went at the 14th fathom, exactly where the reading said it would, 40 feet below where I stood, and the whip of it came up through my hands and my arms and threw me backward off the platform, before I knew I'd let go at all. Falling, I wasn't on the headframe anymore. I was 11 years down, palm flat on Fenno's rope, something wrong humming under my hand that I didn't have words for yet, and I said nothing, because the mark on that rope wasn't mine, and 2 days later, 4 names came off the register that I have never once let myself forget. The yard rushed up. Somewhere in the middle of it, I lost which fall I was in. Fenno's or my own. Which rope. Both endings arrived at the same time, and cost exactly the same.
Warranty invoked. Maker at fault. Recall triggered. Grip 7. Recalls remaining 2.
I woke to the 5th bell and my own ceiling and a hand that would not open past the 2nd knuckle, and lay very still in the dark, counting the 2 recalls I had left the way a woman counts the coins in a thinning purse. Chapter 10. 1 left. I did not spend the walk to the office in prayer. I spent it counting, the way I had lain in the dark counting, 2 recalls left, and nothing waiting behind the 2nd one, a woman standing in a doorway with an empty purse turned out on the counter. I had a fathom number and a fiber name, and one morning to make them mean something to somebody who could refuse a lever. So I went to the only person left who would not laugh at me before I finished the sentence. Andra was already behind her desk when I came in, the ledger closed under her folded hands, as if she had been waiting since before the bell for the knock she knew was coming. I did not sit. I put the 2 things down on her blotter, the way you set stones on a scale. 14 fathoms out, core gone to rot, nothing else touched. River-redded hemp, 3 seasons wet.
Say I'm wrong.
I said.
Go on. Tell me the rope's clean, and I'll walk out of here and let you have your ceremony.
She looked at the words on her own desk a long moment. The line of her shoulders dropped, half an inch, some of the weight in them finally letting go.
I won't tell you that,
She said.
You've read it right. Core's gone soft, the whole third of the strand. Outer fibers sound enough to fool a hand that isn't yours. River hemp, third the price of gild. I bought 40 coils of it 2 winters back, and I've been feeding it into every rope this shaft doesn't need to trust its whole weight to. Ever since.
196 souls ride that cage at the 9th bell.
I said.
Tell me again, which rope doesn't need trust?
That's the one I was going to replace this spring,
She said. Even, like a tally she'd recited before, in mornings I hadn't lived.
Before the flood at 4 and 6 ate the coin I'd set by for it. Third the price bought me 1,100 pump hours I didn't have. 1,100 hours is the difference between a dry level and a drowned one, Toriane. I did the arithmetic. I've done it every morning since the first time your rope killed somebody, and it comes out the same every time. 300 families, or one rope replaced a season early. I chose the families.
You chose wrong.
I said, and my voice cracked on it.
There's a receipt in my own tally book. Guild hemp, guild price, my countermark under it. That's paper. Andra, my name on paper.
Her mouth flattened, and for once she didn't have a number ready.
Your countermark is exactly why it can never be proved.
She said.
You signed for guild hemp because guild hemp is what came through the gate that day, logged and weighed in front of you. The river hemp went into the walk a fortnight later, off the books, out of my own steward's tally, which is sealed to me and to no one below my standing. You could cut the 14th fathom out with your own hands and lay it on this desk, and the register would read rot, true rot, and never once read a buyer. Your book proves you told the truth about the day you signed it. It proves nothing about the day after.
I stood there, both fists closing, the left one closing anyway, the old ache running clear up to the elbow. What settled into place instead had a taste to it, copper and cold at the back of my throat. Nothing she'd signed would hold as proof. Nobody had watched it happen, and the register led nowhere I could follow. 4 mornings of trying to prove it on paper, and paper had never been going to hold it, not once, not since the day I signed for guild hemp in good faith and handed the rest of the story to a woman with a sealed book.
Then there's nothing.
I said.
Nothing I can put in front of Gully. Nothing I can put in front of anyone.
There's the mark iron,
She said, and didn't look away when she said it.
There's always been the mark iron. You've known that since the 5th loop. You've just been finding reasons not to look at it.
She rose then, came around the desk, and for a moment, I thought she meant to touch my ruined hand. She only walked past me to the door and spoke low to the man outside it. When she came back, she told me, without triumph, that there would be a constable posted at the foot of the headframe ladder from now until the cage went down, and that I would not be climbing past him with a story about a fathom number nobody could weigh.
I could stop you outright.
She said.
Gully's crew, the whole yard, if I wanted it ugly. I'm not going to. You've earned better than a mob at the gate, so I'll give you the honest thing instead, since neither of us has time left for the other kind.
Go on then.
I have 1 recall left.
She said.
Only 1. You've got 1 more than I do, if your count runs true, so don't spend it thinking it buys you room. I've spent 5 of mine since your rope first parted, hunting the one shape of this morning where nobody dies and the shaft still runs. I haven't found it. It only comes when someone dies. That reset. I tried once to let a morning end clean. Nothing broken, and it didn't take. The day ran on into a real night, the only one I've had in longer than I can tell you, and I woke into it still owing whatever it owed. Only a death spends 1, so when mine closes, there's no dawn behind it for me. Whatever that cage does today, it will have done it. For good, on my side of it. The world stops being a draft, Toriane. It starts being the thing that's written down.
The room went very quiet, the same quiet I remembered from 40 feet down, a severed rope end still in my hands. 1 morning left after this one, and I had already spent 4 failing to buy more than that. One thing already felt decided, though I couldn't have said when. Whatever the last 2 mornings bought me, neither would be spent chasing the 9th bell again. If there was anything left to buy, it would have to be a question, not another rescue.
Then I'd better decide what it's for.
I said.
Before you throw me out of this office too.
She didn't throw me out. She let me find the door myself, and didn't call anything after me down the hall. I walked into the yard not knowing yet what this morning was worth spending on, only that I had until the 5th bell to choose, and that after this dawn, there was 1 more coming, and after that, none. Chapter 11. The Cushion. I woke into the 5th bell with the gray light coming in flat through the shutter. and knew before I opened my eyes which morning this was. One recall left. I had counted it carefully enough, walking out of Andra's office the night before, that I would not lose track of it now. Whatever today held, I would not get to try it twice.
1.
I said aloud to the ceiling of my own room, to the fifth bell already rolling out over the roofs. My voice came out steadier than I expected.
1. And I mean to spend it on purpose this time.
I lay still a moment with that fact instead of fighting it. This morning I meant to spend the daylight learning something instead of grabbing blind when the bell came, and keep the last recall for the one moment it could actually change something. My hand throbbed at the second knuckle, curled tighter than it had been the morning before. I flexed what was left of it, until the throb steadied into something I could work through, and got up. I did not go to the walk. 22 fathoms had never been 80, and it would not become 80 today. Nor did I go to the mine office to argue. Standing against standing one more time. Andra had already told me the honest thing about that door, sealed tallies, a register that would read rot and never read a buyer. The strongbox then, a locked mark iron only stays locked as long as nobody needs it out. The office was empty at this hour, except for the junior clerk, a boy named Tavo, who slept most mornings with his boots on the second desk, and had never once looked twice at me, before the world started repeating itself around him. I found the strongbox open and bare on its shelf, lid thrown back, and my stomach dropped the particular way it drops when a rope you trusted goes slack in your hand.
Where's the iron?
I said, not a question by the time it left me. Tavo blinked up out of half-sleep and shrugged like it cost him something to move that much. He was not Pell, would never have crossed the room grinning to tell me. He was not Gully, would never have given me a straight answer without wanting something first. He was only a boy who wanted his desk back, and he gave me the short version to get it. The steward herself had come for the iron before the sixth bell, signed it out in her own hand for the passing, and the strongbox stood empty every ceremony morning by long custom, because nobody locks up the thing they mean to carry through a crowd within the hour. I had known Andra kept the mark under her own authority. I had not thought, in 5 mornings of trying, to ask where authority actually walked. I went out into the yard early, ahead of the crowd that would come up the road for a mark passing they still believed was happening on schedule, and found her on the drumhead path with 2 constables flanking her, and a velvet cushion carried flat across both forearms like an offering. My own mark iron sat on it, black iron gone dull with handling, the head stamped T rail where I had cut it myself the year I made rank 6. 6 years of wanting, riding toward me on a square of blue cloth in a woman's outstretched hands, and I stood in the open yard and could not make myself move toward it.
You're up early again,
Andra said without turning her head, as if she had known exactly where I was standing before she said it. She probably had.
Walk with me if you like. I won't stop you looking.
I did not walk with her. I let her pass 6 feet off and counted instead, the steps from where she stood now, to the rope head at the drum, the width of open ground between the cushion and the iron collar where the cage line ran down into the shaft. 22 paces, maybe less if the crowd thinned it. I turned the number over the way I used to turn a fathom count, testing it for the give in it, the places it might bend. The cage came up loaded behind her, chains singing, and Pell leaned out past the gate rail with his good arm raised, grinning with the gap where his eye tooth had chipped last spring, nothing in his face carrying what I carried.
Morning, Rale,
He called. The whole width of the yard between us, and none of what I knew standing in it yet. I lifted my hand back at him. It was the wrong hand. It barely closed. I did not go looking for the 9th bell's edge to save whoever it meant to take. 5 mornings of trying had taught me only the shape of my own failing. I went looking for Andra's answer instead, the 22 paces already counted, the collar where the load rope ran into the shaft already fixed in my head. When the cage came up loaded and the bell began its climb toward 9, I started for the drumhead anyway, not to pull a body free, but to see whether a hand set right on the load rope in the half-second before it parted could buy Gully anything at all. I got 6 paces before a constable's arm caught me across the chest, and threw me back against the fence rail hard enough to empty my lungs. He said nothing. He did not need to. Andra's face across the yard told me she had already marked what I was doing, and that she would remember it long after this morning stopped mattering to anyone else. I stayed against the rail. The cage came up. The rope went at the same flaw it always found. 14 fathoms of line out from the drum, and this time no one stood close enough to reach it before it ran. Not Gully, not me, not the constable who had spent his strength keeping me off the drumhead instead of on it. The scream that followed was the scream I had heard 5 mornings running, and I stood at the rail and let it finish instead of throwing myself into the middle of it.
Warranty invoked. Maker at fault. Recall 6 of 6, grip 6.
No number after it. No recalls remaining. The system had never once bothered to tell me when I was down to nothing, and it did not bother now. I only knew. The way you know a rope is done for good, past splicing, past anything but the fire. Chapter 12. 4 hours, no reset. I had already made the choice before I ever opened my eyes. Spend the last one on knowing instead of trying. Watch it happen instead of fighting it blind. What woke me wasn't a panel. There was no panel. Only the gray light, and my right hand exactly as I'd left it, curled past the second knuckle. The same throb sitting in the same joints it had sat in when I'd finally let the dark take me the night before. Nothing had smoothed over in the sleeping. Nothing had gone back. No count this time. No small mercy of a number that meant I could still be wrong and live to try again. Because there was no number left to give one. I lay in the gray a moment with that settled over me. Then I made myself sit up, because lying there with it wasn't going to make it lighter. A ratchet with no reverse gear, and no reset behind it either now. The hand that hadn't healed in the night was the same hand that would have to last me the whole of today, whatever today asked of it. I found the old marlinspike under my cot, the one I'd carried since my own apprenticeship, and I closed my fingers around it and counted. 1, 2, 3. By 11 the ache started, a slow crush working up from the base of my thumb. By 17, my knuckles shook hard enough that the spike ticked against my ring with every count. At 20 it fell, and my hand hung open at my side like something that belonged to somebody else. 20. That was what I had. Not a rope's worth of grip. Not enough to finish tying my own boots without stopping twice. 20 counts to hold an iron shut against whatever it needed to hold shut, and then it would let go whether I told it to or not, and there would be no dawn behind this one to forgive the difference between 20 and 21. I didn't waste the light arguing with the fact. I'd spent 6 mornings arguing with men who outranked me, and one arguing with a woman who remembered every one of them better than I did, and none of that had bought me anything but a longer walk back to the same bell. So I went where an argument wasn't going to be the point. I went to find Pell. He was already at the rope walk when I got there, folding the blanket he kept balled in the corner behind the fiber bins, straw still caught in his hair from the night. He looked up at me, the way he always did those gray mornings, blanket bunched in his fists like he meant to stuff the whole night out of sight before I could see the state of him, and for one breath I let myself want nothing more complicated than that. A boy who'd slept rough and a blanket that needed folding.
"You're up early,"
he said.
"Ceremony's not for hours."
I didn't have hours to spend proving myself to him in the way I'd have chosen, a piece at a time, letting him come to it. I had 4, and I'd already burned a fraction of 1 on a marlinspike.
You've slept in that corner 11 nights running.
I said.
Since the night your father put you out for the debt on the fever cure. You scratched the healer's name under the tally slate, so nobody laying eyes on the book would ask why the household coin didn't add up, and you've been paying her off 2 coppers at a stretch ever since, out of your own wage, which is why you're always short at the tannery on 6th day.
He went very still, the blanket half folded in his hands.
"How do you—"
He stopped himself, started again, quieter.
"I never told you that. I never told anybody that."
You didn't tell me today.
I said.
You told me on a different morning. I've had 6 of them, Pell. This is the 7th. And there's no eighth waiting to undo it, if I get it wrong. No reset behind today. Not for my hand. Not for any of it. Same dawn, over and over. The cage always coming down at the 9th bell. And every time it killed, I woke up back here, and it was the 5th bell again. Until this one, which just didn't. It's the same morning it's always been, except now it's the only one I've got.
It moved through him the way it had moved through nobody else. Not Gully, not the shift captain, not even Andra, who'd at least started the morning already believing the world could work that way. Pell had no such advantage. He had a boy's face doing the arithmetic of a woman standing in front of him with a hand that wouldn't close, telling him things about his own life that only he and one dead quiet healer's ledger should have known.
The straw.
He said slowly, like he was checking each stone before he put weight on it.
You knew about the straw before I ever let you see it.
I've seen you fold that blanket 4 mornings. That never happened for you.
I said.
I've heard you say early, like it costs you something, because it does. I'm not guessing, Pell. I wish I were.
7 mornings.
He said, like the number itself was a weight he was testing with his hand before he'd carry it.
And every one of them, you came here first. Not the constables, not Andra, me.
Every one.
I said. He didn't answer that gently. His jaw worked like he wanted to be angry at me for it, and hadn't decided yet if he had the right to be.
Then you'd better not be wrong today.
He said.
I've got a life pinned under that ceremony too. Yours isn't the only one that ends if you are.
I know it.
I said, and I let him see that I meant it, because a lie would have cost more than I had left to spend. He set the blanket down on the bin, careful, the way a man sets something down when his hands have stopped being steady enough to trust with anything else, and he looked at my curled fingers instead of my face.
All right.
He said.
I believe you.
A breath.
What do you need?
He didn't ask what happened, or why now. The other question, how many more mornings I had left, sat behind his teeth, and he let it stay there.
Today the ceremony runs long.
I said.
Longer than Andra plans for. You keep it running, and you keep her attention off me, however you have to. I need her eyes nowhere else.
And you?
He said. I didn't answer that. Some things I wasn't going to spend on being understood. Not even by him. Not with 20 counts of grip standing between me and whatever the 9th bell was going to ask of my hand.
Just keep her watching.
I said again. He looked at me a moment longer, the straw still in his hair. 11 nights and 1 debt, and a father's door all sitting behind his eyes. And then he put his hand out, the way men shook on rope orders when there wasn't paper enough to make it official. I took it with my left. We shook on a plan I never said out loud. Not the whole of it. Not even to him. Somewhere behind the rope walk wall, the 5th bell started ringing, and I turned toward the yard, because there wasn't going to be a version of this morning where I got there late. Chapter 13. The Yard Fills. The last ordinary hour ended the way all the others had, nobody noticing it going. By mid-morning, the road up from the valley carried people in a thickening stream, a trickle, and then a flood, until I stood at the rope walk door, and the crowd and the mine yard had become the same crowded thing. 300, I judged. Maybe more. Families in their good coats, children riding shoulders to see over the fence, a fiddler somewhere near the gate sawing out something meant to sound festive, and mostly succeeding. Near the fence stood a man in a gray coat, a small brass seal pinned above his pocket. Winter assize business, and today's yard would answer to it before the week was out. A charter measure was a once-a-year thing, and a mark passing rarer than that. And Deepwater had never in its history had both fall on the same morning. They had come for a party. I had spent 6 mornings that none of them would ever remember trying to keep one from turning into a funeral, and watching a woman lift her daughter onto her shoulders for a better view of the drum. I could not decide whether that made the crowd innocent, or made me the only one in it who understood what the drum was for. Gully found me at the drum before I found him, which was its own kind of wrong. Usually I sought him out, and he made me work for the conversation. Today he came straight over, wiping his hands on a rag that hadn't held grease in an hour, close enough that pipe smoke had replaced it on his coat.
Words going round you're handing the walk on.
He said.
Today, to the boy.
He tipped his chin at Pell, who was up on the platform checking the collar bolts for the second time in 10 minutes, hands too busy to be doing anything useful.
That true, Rale?
I opened my mouth and found I did not have an answer that was both true and short. I don't know if there's a walk left to hand on by noon was true and not short. Yes was short and might be the last lie I ever told him, if the morning went the way I meant it to. Gully's face had never learned to hide anything. A man who in 6 loops had never once done more or less than what his tally and his conscience told him. And I gave him the only thing I had left that wasn't a lie.
Watch the drum today.
I said.
Whatever else happens, watch the drum.
He frowned at that, the way a man frowns at a sentence that answers a question he didn't ask, and before he could push me on it, the fiddler struck up something louder, and the crowd's noise swallowed whatever he might have said next. I let it swallow the moment, too. There wasn't a better one to give him. Pell came down off the platform when I waved him over, and we stood in the lee of the drum housing, where the crowd noise thinned to a hum, and nobody was near enough to hear a rope-maker confess something 11 years old.
You asked me once, on the walk, what happened with Fenno.
I said.
I told you a rope broke. That's not the whole of it, and you should have the whole of it before the 9th bell, because I'm about to do something, and I want you to know why.
Pell didn't say anything. He had the look he got when he was letting a rope run through his hands slow, feeling for a flaw he couldn't name yet.
I was 17. Fenno had me walking the Orbridge rope for the spring inspection, and I put my palm flat on it, the way he taught me, and something moved under my hand that had no business being there, a softness where there should have been none. I didn't have read the lay then, just 11 years of hands that already knew rope better than my mouth knew words, and I said nothing.
My voice came out steady. I'd braced for it to break.
The mark on that rope was his, not mine. I told myself the wrongness wasn't mine to carry either, that a maker's responsibility stops at the edge of her own strike, and past that edge belongs to somebody else. 4 people went into that gorge, 2 weeks later.
You were 17.
Pell said, low.
I was old enough to open my mouth.
I said.
I've spent 11 years telling myself the boundary was the mark. My fault. Past it. Not mine. I have said that sentence to myself so many mornings I stopped hearing it as an excuse.
Past his shoulder the crowd went on. The cushion Andra hadn't yet brought out. The drum waiting patient and enormous under all that noise.
It had never been true, just easier.
Pell's jaw worked once, and he gave me nothing back. No forgiveness, no blame, just a short nod that could have meant either, before his attention slid past me toward the housing, toward the cushion still not yet in Andra's hands. That was when Andra found us. She came around the housing with the mark iron cushion already balanced in her hands, 2 constables a half step behind her, and stopped, her free hand closing tighter on the cushion's edge until the knuckles went pale, when her look crossed my face. The fiddler finished one phrase and started another before she moved again. Too late to fix my expression into anything safer, I knew she'd found something she hadn't come looking for. Pell reached her a moment later, with a story about a loose brake chalk, a thing that had never once been loose in its life.
The mark passing,
She said, not to me, pitching her voice out over the crowd.
We'll wait until the cage is down.
A ripple went through the yard, shoulders turning back toward the fence.
Pell tells me there's a chalk, wants checking on the brake. We'll do it properly, once the deep draws run, and there's nothing left to interrupt.
She said it like a courtesy, though we both knew it wasn't. She'd read my face and decided, correctly, that whatever I meant to do with that iron, I meant to do it before the cage moved, and Pell's chalk story only gave her a public reason to put the one door I needed on the far side of the very thing 6 mornings had already failed to stop. Chapter 14. Struck Through. Andra's mouth had already flattened into command by the time the news finished landing on her. There would be no ceremony to wait through on the far side of the draw. There would be no far side, not the way Andra meant it. If the iron only mattered before the cage moved, then before the cage moved was where I had to be, and the 9th bell was already climbing toward its last stroke.
Cage clear,
Gully called, and the drum took up its turn, iron teeth biting the gears, the rope paying out over the sheave with that long, unbroken sound gone wrong 6 times already, always at the same place. Andra stood at the collar with the cushion still balanced on her forearm, the iron lying on its velvet, like something asleep, 2 constables a half-step behind her shoulder. Her eyes stayed on the drum, not on me. That was the whole of my chance.
Steward.
Pell said, too loud, pitching straight for her.
The brake chalk slipped on the number 2 post.
And it was a lie built out of nothing, but he said it like he'd already decided it was true, and Andra's head turned half a hand's width toward the post before she caught herself. Half a hand's width was enough. I closed the distance in 4 strides and took the iron off the cushion with my good hand, while her eyes were still coming back around. She said my name. One constable grabbed for my sleeve and missed. I did not run, because running was a thing a thief did, and I was not stealing anything that had ever belonged to anyone but me. At the collar, 40 feet of rope already gone into the shaft below me, I set the haft of the iron into my right palm. Nothing closed around it. 2 fingers curled. The others lay dead against the metal, the way they had lain dead against a marlinspike that morning, obedient for a count, and then simply finished. I brought my left hand up and folded it over the right, pressing the dead fingers shut around the shaft with my own working strength, holding closed what would not hold itself. The drum kept turning. Somewhere below, a fathom went by that I had no time to count. I found my own mark stamped into the lead seal at the rope's head, T. Rale, struck clean and proud, 11 years of habit deep, and I brought the iron down across it. The strike went crooked the first time, my grip already failing at the edge of its 20, and the count ran out under my palm like sand through a fist. I did not let go. I turned the iron with my whole forearm instead of my fingers, and struck again, and this time the cancel line bit through the seal in one clean stroke, top to bottom, my name crossed out by my own hand, at the one place it could never be uncrossed.
Warranty revoked. Maker's fault logged. Craft rank. Lay. 6-0.
The yard did not gasp so much as stop breathing all at once, 300 throats catching on the same half-second.
break.
Gully said, and it was not a question to anyone, least of all himself. His sworn tally had never once given him a choice in the matter, and it did not give him one now. The lever came back under both his hands before the echo of the panel had finished dying in my ears, and the drum's turn shuddered, caught, held. 40 feet of loaded rope hung suspended in the dark below the collar, going nowhere.
No!
Andra said, and she was already moving, cushion abandoned on the boards, straight for the lever herself, both hands closing over the wood where Gully still gripped it.
Let it run. Let it finish. It's clear of the fathom. It's past the...
He did not let it run. He did not even answer her. He simply did not move. A man built out of granite and a clause he had sworn to with his own name on it. And for the first time in 11 years, Andra Vesk put her whole weight into a lever and found it would not go where she pushed it. I stood at the collar with the iron still locked under my dead hand's numb fingers and waited to fall. That was the shape the day always took. A death, and then the 5th bell again, and my own bed, and the cost paid quietly in grip, while the world forgot everything I had just spent. I braced for the drop the way you brace for a step that isn't there. Weight already committed before the body understands the ground has held. The ground held. The cage hung. The bell finished its 9th stroke and let the silence come in behind it. And nobody in that silence was dead. No warmth folded over the world and pulled it back to dawn. No panel opened. My hand throbbed where the iron had bitten it, and stayed throbbing. The pain refusing to be undone. because there was nothing left this time for the day to undo. 6 had been the number from the start, and I had spent it honestly, back in a morning that no longer had any bearing on this one. Andra's hand went still on the wood where it still rested over Gully's, the fight going out of her fingers before it went out of the rest of her. Something crossed her face that hadn't been there in 6 mornings of watching me fail. The arithmetic she'd laid out for me at the sealed tally, running the other way for once. No one had died. There was nothing below the collar for her last recall to undo, and I had none left of my own to spend on anything at all. For the first time since I'd known her, her arithmetic came out to nothing. Andra let go of the lever last of all, and when she turned to me, the heat had gone out of her face, leaving something flatter and much worse.
You understand what you've done,
She said, quiet enough that it was only for me, though half the yard was close enough to hear it anyway.
The cage was never going to fail today. You saw to that yourself, standing there with an iron in a dead hand. The mark is what you've broken. You've told every soul on this mountain, in front of witnesses and the register both, that Toriane Rale's rope was unsound.
She glanced once at the collar, at the crossed-out seal, and back at me.
It doesn't matter what the 14th fathom actually held. No living soul will ever believe that rope was sound. You made certain of that yourself, with your own hand, in front of everyone who will ever hire a rope walk again.
I opened my mouth to answer her, and found I had nothing that would fit through it. The winch held. The cage hung 40 feet down in the dark, full and breathing, saved for nothing that mattered now. And around us, in 2s and 3s, the yard was starting to understand exactly what its rope maker had just sworn, out loud, with her own iron and her own name, about the work of her own 2 hands. Chapter 15. Read it. Nobody in the yard said the word revoked out loud. They didn't need to. It moved through the crowd quiet and complete, until every face turned my way carried the same look, the flat arithmetic of a person doing sums about me that I could no longer argue with.
You broke your own rope.
Gully said, from a good 10 feet off, like standing closer might catch.
In front of the charter inspector, on ceremony day.
There was nothing in me worth saying back to that, so I let it stand. I stood at the collar with my ruined hand shut inside my working one and let them look. The days after went slow, then all at once, and nothing I did changed where any of it landed. The winter assize inspector rode out on the 3rd day, found the deep draw hadn't run full tonnage since the mark passing, and struck the charter measure from his book without asking me a single question. The 10-year contract went to a walk 2 valleys over, a family outfit at Ashdale that had never laid a rope over 400 stone in its life, and would now lay them at 900, on Andra's coin. The guild courier came the week after that, and read the roll strike off a paper with a seal that had come down 100 times onto other people's ruin, and it turned out exactly the same going the other way. In the yard they'd stopped calling me Ropewalk Rale. The new name came from 2 boys hauling slag who didn't know I stood close enough to catch it. Deadmark Rale. It fit well enough that I let it sit. I did not let it stop me from climbing the drum. My right hand could hold a knife for a count of 20 before it failed, and cutting a rope core takes longer than 20, so I worked it in bursts, the blade set, my left hand forcing the right shut around the grip, 4 strokes, then a rest with both hands shaking in my lap while I found the count again. 40 feet below me the cage sat empty and dark on its chocks. Nobody had run it since. I counted fathoms of rope with my eyes because my palms had already told me where to cut, back at the 9th bell, back when it mattered, and the 14th waited exactly where the reading had put it. The outer strands parted clean, sound as the day I laid them, hemp gone gold with wax and handling. The core came apart wrong. It didn't tear so much as give, wet and soft under the blade, and the smell that came up off it was river bottom and rot, the smell of a thing that had spent 3 seasons wet before it ever reached my walk. I sat on the drum housing with the black fistful of it in my lap. My face was wet before I understood why. Not grief exactly, something closer to a held breath finally let go, with nothing left to hold it for. I had been right. I had been right the whole time, on every recall, in every version of that morning, and it hadn't bought back one thing I'd lost for it. The core sat black and stinking in my lap, proof of a thing nobody needed proof of anymore. The clerk at the register logged the exhibit in a hand, as neat and unbothered as the one that had logged my Mark's suspension, weighed the rotten core, wrote river-redded, 3 seasons wet in the margin, and closed the book without opening an inquiry, exactly as Andra had promised he would. She stood at the counter while he did it, in her good coat, her standing still 9, untouched by any of it on paper.
I keep my post,
She said, not quite a question, like she wanted me to argue it.
I know.
I won't buy river hemp again. Not at any price, not for any pump.
She looked at the black mass in the clerk's dish a moment longer than she needed to.
That's the whole of what your hand bought you. I thought you should hear it from me instead of guessing.
My hand had gone past the 20-count throb into the kind that just sits there, dull and total, and I didn't trust my voice to come out even, so I let the silence stand in for me. She waited on it a moment, got nothing back, and settled her coat over her shoulder. The clerk was already reaching for the next ledger before the door shut behind her. I signed the walk over to Pell on a Tuesday, in the mine office, with a guild clerk who didn't ask why a stripped rope-maker still had a walk to give. It was the smallest ceremony I have ever stood through. He held the deed in both hands like it might still be taken back, and I told him it wouldn't be. Not by me, not by anyone, because a roll strike only reaches the mark, not the ground under it.
Craft rank, lay, 0. Read the lay. Rank 3. Judgment skills are unaffected by mark revocation.
I read the words twice before they meant anything. Somewhere under the wreck of everything I'd signed away, the one gift that had never carried my name was still mine, whole, unbroken, waiting on nothing but a load to answer to. Pell came to the shed 3 mornings later with his first rope coiled over both shoulders, 40 fathoms of tram line he'd laid alone, and set it across the trestle in front of me, the way I used to set mine in front of Fenno.
Rank 3 reads core condition.
He said.
You told me that yourself, about 100 times, across about 6 mornings, nobody else remembers.
He put my good hand flat on the rope and folded the ruined one over it, holding both there.
So read it.